זה כמו מלמול, 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 זה כמו מלמול, כמו רישוש בתוך הראש, רישוש, זה כמו מלמול, 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 מלמול. עלי מתים מתפוררים, עלי מתים מתפוררים, ומשולם חללים. Like a story, I have to tell it like a story. Find the words to understand. If I don't tell it like a story, I will never understand what happened to me, what happened to him, because he'll never, never, never. There's a buzz inside my head.
Hello and welcome to All Together Now. I'm your host, Bobby Steinbach, and I am delighted that we can be together tonight. We opened the show with a taste of the universe we will be exploring this evening, a vignette created by visual artist Kevork Murad, and you heard an excerpt of Osvaldo Golyov's tone poem in voices, Falling Out of Time, performed by the Silk Road Ensemble. And that was Nora Fisher singing. She and some of her colleagues are going to join us a little later. So before it was a piece of music, Falling Out of Time was a genre-defying book by the Israeli novelist and Booker Prize winner David Grossman. And someday it will also be an animated film. The recording of Falling Out of Time comes out Friday, October 9th. And here is the beautiful CD. The artwork on this is absolutely gorgeous, and there's a beautiful booklet in it as well, which we'll talk about a little more later. We are here tonight to take a deep dive into the creative process and talk about the layering of artistic perspectives. Our story is in three parts: the past, the present, and the future, told from multiple points of view. The composer, Osvaldo Golyov, was born in Argentina and lived in Jerusalem before coming to the US over 30 years ago. He's a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient and the Loyola Professor of Music at the College of the Holy Cross. Welcome, Osvaldo.
Thank you, Bobby. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you here tonight. Let's start by talking about the beginning of your journey with Falling Out of Time, which actually starts before you read David Grossman's book. Who is Itzhak Frankenthal?
Itzhak Frankenthal founded a group of bereaved parents in Palestine and Israel whose children have been murdered by the conflict, right? And where he shifted the perspective of the enemy not to the other people, but rather to blaming both governments, and it's not about that. Mostly it is about we are suffering the fate that we don't wish anybody else to suffer. So they started this group whose aim is to not exist anymore, right? And he told me, I met him in 2002, and he told me the story of a father whose son had been killed and who refused to go back at night to sleep in his own bed and slept on his son's grave for a number of years. And Itzhak decided that the only thing he could do was to accompany that father and slept with him until that father was able to re-enter the world of time, right? So I think that was the root. And then when I read the first page of David Grossman's novel, maybe 10 years after that, where the walking man says, I have to go there, I thought this is the entry point to setting that that experience to music, that experience that I cannot even pretend to ever understand.
Mm. So what is the story then that David Grossman tells in Falling Out of Time, Osvaldo?
Right. Well, David suffered that loss, but he created a book in which Falling Out of Time, it's set as a fable, as a mythological village. It's almost like a radio play, right? And characters that are timeless appear. I mean, nobody has a real name. It's the working man, his wife, who cannot accompany him in his walk and climbs atop a belfry in their village. Then a procession of people who see the walking man walking in circles, trying to reach his dead son, but they also have suffered the same fate. So he acts like a Pied Piper, right? He's both an Orpheus and a Pied Piper, because these people that are also bereaved start following him in this procession to quote unquote there, or to nowhere. So it is that's the story. I mean, the story is a simple, endless walk into that exile, out of time and out of space, which is grief. That's what it is.
Thank you so much, Osvaldo. That is a wonderful beginning to the story we're telling tonight. And to join the conversation, we have invited the acclaimed author Emily St. John Mandel and the critic Deborah Cash to join us. Emily's novel, Station 11. Oh, here is Station 11. And I tell you what, I am reading this book again. And I just loved it the first time, and I'm loving it the second time. This book was shortlisted for the National Book Award and has been translated into 33 languages. Her most recent book is The Glass Hotel, and I hope to read that really soon. I have my copy. Deborah Cash's roles in the Boston cultural community have spanned journalism, education, and advocacy for the rights of creative professionals. She has served as a critic for the Boston Globe and was a founding senior contributor of the Arts Fuse, where we read her insightful review of Falling Out of Time. Welcome, Emily and Deborah. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful to be here.
Before we dive into the creative process, Deborah, I want to ask you to talk about David's book. In your review of Falling Out of Time, you said, this is a book that makes a reader avert her eyes, and a book that time may prove to be an indispensable classic. Can you expand on what you said in your review?
Sure. And I'd also add that I think that Osvaldo's way of presenting this material will similarly be felt as indispensable when it's out in the world in a broader way. This is a story of grief. This is a story of bereavement. It's a story that is about David's own experience, comes out of David's own experience of losing his son. But we're all bereaved. We have all lost the people that we've lost. We've all lost people to the conflict in the Middle East. We've all lost people to the streets of Minneapolis. We've all lost people in our lives. And the sense in which each person has to privately process their own sorrow does not absolve them from a kind of community of grief where each person comes together. And as Valdo said, the parent circle that notably David Grossman dedicated half of his grant that he won for the Israel Prize to the parent circle is a way of saying this is going on and on. It's a kind of concentric circles, just as the story is a spiral and goes out to the hills. We, as we have our interior experience, turn it into language, turn it into music, turn it into a way of sharing that information, and then it goes out further and further. And it's indispensable, not just because it's great work, but because I think that David Grossman, in his genius, has been able to give us language for some of those interior states that we didn't have before.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That, for me, that brought up the idea of how we now, especially the whole world, is grieving for what we have lost and what we might lose. And what more timely a book could we read right now to help us on our journey as human beings? So thank you for that. I am struck by an artist's choice to explore places most people would never willingly choose to go. Osvaldo, you did that with Falling Out of Time, and Emily, you certainly went there with Station 11, which takes place in the aftermath of a flu pandemic that has killed most of the world's population. Osvaldo, how do you choose to go there when there is so very painful?
Yeah, well, I keep asking myself if maybe it's more helpful or more healing to do something like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire did than writing this, but I think the answer to your question is, I personally know 7 couples of either friends or family who have experienced this. And I think it's so painful for them, it's unbearable. And for us, like Deborah said in her review of David's book, we want to avert our gaze. And by averting our gaze, we keep confining them to that exile of grief, right? So without pretending to ever understand how it feels, at least I wanted to say, I see you. I want to accompany you as much as it is possible to accompany you in your journey. That's all.
Thank you. Emily, a similar question for you. Tell us about your choice to explore a dystopian world. And was it a choice? Were you compelled or something else? And of course, now that we're in a pandemic, how has your relationship to that story you told changed?
It was a choice. And I have to say, your question dovetails in a really interesting way with the reason why, in what may very well be a failure of courage on my part, I couldn't bring myself to read this book. I'm raising a small child during a pandemic, and I found that to be an utterly terrifying experience, so much so that I felt like I couldn't take on that story at the moment. And for me, though, it was really parenthood, not the pandemic, that has changed my relationship to Station 11. There's something about writing a fiction wherein a lot of people die that's much easier to do before you have a child. So, if I'm to be honest with myself, I don't know that I would have had the courage to write that novel after giving birth. It was something that was possible for me way back in 2012, 2013, when I was finishing the book. But I don't think I could do it now, if I'm to be absolutely honest.
That's very telling. And I just totally can relate to what you just said, Emily. Thank you for that, because that was very honest and deep from within. Osvaldo, do you have any thoughts about what Emily just told us?
Actually, I do. I think, I think David's book is and similar, and on the other hand, the polar opposite of Emily's. David's book is the refusal to accept what has happened. I mean, the idea of the walk in David's work, of the walking man, is as long as I am in motion, my son is somehow alive. You know, it's an anti-requiem, an anti-elegy. I found Emily's book, I found, in terms of your question, is the embodiment of of something that David told me. He said the two messengers, two soldiers came to tell him and his wife that their son had died. It was at night in their home. And after hearing the news, the first thing they did was to go upstairs to wake up their youngest, who was 12 at the time. And the first thing she said to them was, "But we shall live." And I think that's what Emily's book is. And actually, one leitmotiv is survival is not enough.
Right. It's insufficient.
So I think that is very, very, to me, is shattering to see the two responses, right? The complete refusal to accept in David's book. And I think that Emily's book starts from radical acceptance, and that's it. And then they also walk all the time.
But to go back to something you said a moment ago, the difference might largely be a question of time. You know, in Station 11, it's not the shattering aftermath of tragedy. It's 20 years later. And I think that does make a difference, that, you know, that time is what changes everything in these scenarios.
But, you know, what we're talking about here, how we deal with the most difficult of things in our lives through art. Deborah, would you like to jump in here, please?
Sure. So at the very end of David Grossman's book, there's a heartbreaking and beautiful quote, because he says, he, meaning the son, he is dead, but his death is not dead. And I think that really summarizes for me the way in grief we have different phases. We have the scream of the original discovery, the original loss. We have what we may experience in Jewish tradition a week later at the end of Shiva, at the end of 30 days at the Shloshim, at the year where you would put a stone up on the grave. But the notion that you're moving through time, you're moving through a process that is both painful, but also is bringing you new knowledge, new understanding, new, in David Grossman's case, new language. And he's talked about how he had to write the book in order to have his own experience, that's the way he processes his own interiority. And I would certainly say that in Osvaldo's setting of his work, the distillation of that journey, the way different moments, different music from different cultures is brought together to create a sense that this is something that's happening all over the world. This is happening in different voices, in different circumstances, but it's all grief, it's all human, it's all things that we all have to struggle with and we have to figure out how to share. And I think that the process of doing this is in fact healing insofar as we can share it.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Osvaldo, while you were writing your tone poem in Voices, were you in conversation with David Grossman?
Yes. Not only that, even if he, at the beginning of the process, he said that he never wants to collaborate, to be part of the adaptations of his books, you know, either to theater. A lot of his books have been brought as theater plays. He was extraordinarily helpful throughout the writing, but perhaps the most extraordinary thing that happened to us, by us I mean the Silk Road Ensemble and I, during the process was when we workshopped the piece 10 months before the premiere at the Contemplative Center of the College of the Holy Cross. And David came, and he just his presence there affected the music, but then he found the time to talk to everyone individually. And then I think the last day, he spoke to all of us and told us about his son, what it means, what it meant to write the book. The idea, we are talking always about grief and grief and grief, which is of course the theme of the book. But I think the other theme of the book is what is present in Station 11, which is art, right? David spoke about art as opening the dimension where it is possible to experience both the negation of life and its affirmation, right? And I think the book is very much that, as it is, I think, reading Emily's book, and specifically all the Shakespearean subplot.
Thank you. It's just, when you said David came in and took the time to talk to all the artists, it just solidifies to me, and we have certainly found it here on All Together Now, the generosity of artists. Emily and Deborah, I could talk to you for hours. Any last thoughts? Deborah, let's start with you.
I think that we need to understand that language and text, in this case translated Hebrew into English, and musical languages are different, and they work differently in our bodies and in our imaginations. That one of the things about reading a book, and you were talking about this earlier, is that you can kind of decide how long you want to read. You're going to take a little morsel and put it aside and do something else and get a sandwich or whatever you're doing. Time happens very differently in music, certainly when it's live. We're not privileged right now to be able to hear the Silk Road Ensemble live, but the sense in which the arc of a musical composition takes us into time in a different way, and that we need to learn how to be patient with both of those languages and understand the gifts that each of them give us.
Thank you, Deborah. Emily.
I listened to Osvaldo's brilliant album this morning. I was so moved by it. And I was reading the booklet and reading more about the project. And I find myself so struck and moved by this idea of accompaniment. In specific, there's that story about a man, I believe the founder of the Parents Circle, who accompanied a man who just lost his child at the gravestone of that child through days and nights. And what I've been thinking about is the way that art accompanies us, especially in a time like this, where 200,000 Americans are dead, and that number hasn't stopped going up. And in a lot of ways, the world can seem objectively dire, but we're not alone as we move through that. I think that art can move through it with us, can help us move through it.
Thank you so much, Emily and Deborah, for joining us for this conversation. You both have been you all have been so gracious in sharing and so eloquent. Take care and be well, and keep creating and talking about art, and we shall meet again on the other side.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Osvaldo, before we welcome our next guest, we have a snippet of video from the world premiere performance at Brooks Concert Hall on the campus of the College of the Holy Cross. This is the Silk Road Ensemble performing. Is there anything you want to tell us before we watch?
Yeah, well, this is a long emotional journey. At this particular moment in the journey, the father goes a little crazy, and he plays a childish game with himself. He says, as long as I don't blink, I can empty my body and call my son to inhabit it and live his unlived life. So I conceive the music as a labyrinth, right? The father is trapped into this possibility that as long as he doesn't blink, an entire lifetime could happen in his body. And then he rejects at the end that idea, because he says, no, I don't want you to see with my own eyes what happened to you. So it's a labyrinth.
Thank you. Let's roll that video, please. That is so incredibly intense, stunning. Osvaldo, I know that at the beginning of this process, before you'd written a note, you told your executive producer you were hearing the piece for the Silk Road Ensemble. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Well, okay, so I always think of Silk Road. Every time I think of them, I feel that they are collectively like a single harp, but that harp has like 10,000 strings or hairs, right? Mm-hmm. And what this means is, like, you know, between two adjacent notes. Here in the piano there is nothing, but in the Silk Road there are dozens of notes, not pitch, but emotions. You know, they can the degree, the precision of nuance between notes is extraordinary. So many. The reason, I mean, the only people that could play this piece to me were the Silk Road, because many other ensembles, which are amazing and all of that, to me, I don't know how was the older TVs here in America, but in Argentina, when I was a child, my TV had channels, the dial, it would go like click, 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 click. I don't know if it's here too, but anyway, So many ensembles are like that. Oh, that's channel 10, then they go to channel 11 and 12. Silk Road, no, there is a million pre-existing channels and channels that don't exist that they can hear in between 10 and 11, right? So we needed that because this is not a piece that is, sometimes it's bold strokes, but sometimes it's so microscopic. So they have that. But even more important than that, at their center, at the center of the Silk Road, there is this extraordinary spiritual silence, right? That I don't know any other ensemble that has it. It's not a physical silence, like a lack of sound. There is this sometimes cosmic, sometimes terrifying silence. And this piece has that. And also as a friend that has seen the ensemble being born 20 years ago, I wanted to stretch myself and to stretch them, to give them a piece that is within them, but is not the customary smile that reflects another aspect of life that is true and real and inevitable.
Well, let's bring in some of those musicians from Silk Road then. Nora Fisher is joining us from Amsterdam, and she's a soprano who studied philosophy and musicology before getting her master's degree in new audiences and innovative practice. Jeremy Flower, joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts, is a multi-instrumentalist and composer of both acoustic and electronic music. And cellist Karen Uzunian, joining us from New York, approaches music making with a deeply communicative and passionate spirit. Regular viewers of All Together Now will remember Karen's gorgeous performance of the Armenian lament, Groom. Welcome, Karen, Jeremy, and Nora.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
It's so good to see all of you. I've certainly heard your work on the album, so to see your faces is delightful. Karen, could you tell us a bit about Silk Road, the nonprofit organization that commissioned the work and supported the creative process, and give us a sense of that process? And as you're describing it, we will share some photos.
Sure. So Silk Road, which Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, conceived of about 20 years ago, was inspired by the historical Silk Road and by this exchange of ideas, of culture. It's founded on the principle of bringing together artists from different traditions and places and really creating a fertile soil from which new art can emerge, new ideas and connections can emerge. And that vision is really beautifully illustrated and exemplified in Falling Out of Time. The process of creating this piece was so richly collaborative. It brought together a lot of beautiful voices from different places. And we were all centering ourselves around David and Osvaldo's work, I think with a lot of openness and open-heartedness and vulnerability, which was really essential to the process of creating this piece.
And those photos are absolutely gorgeous. That space, to work in that space, that must have been such a partner for all of you. Just gorgeous. Osvaldo, both the College of the Holy Cross and Arts Transcending Borders, the arts presenting organization on campus, supported this work. Their role extended far, far beyond hosting the premiere. Is that true?
True, yeah. I think that without those days that we spent both 10 months before the premiere and the week before the premiere at the Contemplative Center, the Joyce Contemplative Center at the College of the Holy Cross, I don't think we would have reached the place that we reached, musically and spiritually speaking. So it was an incredible gift to be able to live in the piece, in the music, and in that space all day and all night. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. Jeremy, you have worked with Osvaldo previously, including on the score for Francis Ford Coppola's 2007 film, a film that I really enjoyed, Youth Without Youth, and you created electronic parts for that film. What does that mean, both sonically as people listen and technically? What is your instrument?
It changes every single time I sit down because it's so flexible. If you use electronics to make music, the first thing you have to do is limit yourself because otherwise you're just going to be sitting in front of an empty page forever. Now with Youth Without Youth, we kind of limited ourselves to sounds that could have been made at the time the movie was made. So, or using processes that only existed then. So we pretty much only had pitch shifting, where you take a recording and you play it very, very slowly, like as if it were a recorder being played very slowly, and things that now you have a computer that can do anything you want to the sound, but we really had to think about things that were only available at that time. And that one limitation allowed us to really get into the sounds that we had to work with, and then how to make them into a piece of music or sonic sound design that fit the film in the way we wanted to. Well, in Falling Out of Time, I play electric guitar and modular synthesizer, which is
modular synthesizer.
A bunch of small little synthesis modules that kind of were born out of the days of Don Buchla and Robert Moog. And a few others, of course, but they've kind of had a resurgence in the last 10 or 15 years, and now it's to the point where you can buy a little circuit board and fill it yourself and make your own instruments, which is a lot of the stuff that I've used in this piece.
We have been talking tonight about the layering of artistic perspectives, the author, the composer, the visual artist present in this journey, and I'm interested in your roles as interpreters. Nora, could you speak to that?
Wow, what an honor. Well, I was one of the singers in the project, and I think the super special thing about this project and the way Osvaldo works is that he really writes for people, not necessarily for just instruments that will be played by anyone. So the whole piece was really, really written with each individual musician in mind. And that's why the days and the periods we had at the Contemplative Center were so amazing, because we could really dig into everyone's unique character as expressed through those parts. So it was really, really very tailor-made and a great challenge for all of us, like a wonderful challenge to really make it so personal.
I feel like, our role as interpreters is to really communicate this story, to help convey it as much as we can. And I was the cellist in the piece, and I felt that from the beginning, and this was something Osvaldo mentioned earlier about being at the Contemplative Center, I felt like we were on a unified path, sort of emotionally, from the beginning of our work on this piece. So just like the first night that we got together there, David shared his story with us, and I just felt like the whole space fell silent. Everyone centered around this very vulnerable, personal story. And I felt like everyone's heart kind of connected in that moment. And then we started working, like the work of fine-tuning the piece, of embodying the piece, having it become a natural extension of ourselves. And then we had another sort of emotional check-in. I remember when we were in Boston and Osvaldo was speaking, there was an interview on WBUR, and I could again feel everyone reconnecting after a period of intense work on this very deep emotional level. So just to say that it felt like I felt like we became one organism that developed its own language through this whole process as a collective.
Oh, absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Osvaldo, and this is mind-boggling to me. You wrote this piece for 13 musicians. In addition to Western strings, you wrote, I'm going to read this list here, for the Chinese pipa, our friend Wuman, and sheng, another Chinese instrument, mouth flute, I believe it is, Persian kamanche, an instrument Kehan Kalhor invented, the shakaman, trumpet, flugelhorn, guitar, modular synthesizer, percussion, drum set, electric fretless bass, and 3 voices. Oh my, how did you ever arrive at that?
I think the truest and shortest answer is that if each of these 13 people all play the kazoo, I would still have written the piece for 13 kazoos, because I really wrote, it doesn't matter what they play or what they sing, it is what Karen was saying about creating an organism, and is modulating the energies between them, and not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, you know.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I just want you to know I'm standing by with my kazoo.
Oh,
anytime you need a fill-in,
we need
I'll be there for
member
you.
like now.
Oh my. So Jeremy, I understand that part of the role that you created in Falling Out of Time was as the chorus. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, literally, I recorded many versions of Nora singing. And then I kind of mixed her with a chorus of very poorly behaving electronic instruments. It would be, you know, I'm not going to make a chorus of violins, because we could just add a person to play violin, because that would be a much more enjoyable experience for everybody. But where I take choruses, you can't have more than one Nora. So when we create a chorus of Noras and we mix that together with some electronics to create a new sound that didn't exist before, that's a creative tool that is really powerful and really fun to do.
Yeah, remember, Bobby, the theremin, the theremin instrument that is,
yes,
that you play it like this, and basically you play it on air. So I think that Jeremy's modular synthesizer is like that. It's like it's vocal, and it's dangerous. It's mysterious, right? Doesn't sound electronic. It sounds like otherworldly.
So Nora, you play the tormented writer, who is known as the centaur in Falling Out of Time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there's so much to say. I think the story of that role is that it is the person who has all of these emotions, all of these stories, all of this pain inside of his head, and he needs to pour it out, because otherwise he literally feels like he's falling out of time. Like there's no more sense of being able to be part of the world, I think, or at least it would be my feeling of it. And I think anyone who's dealt with grief maybe recognizes the feeling of like there's like to me it feels like there's like a cloud around your eyesight that just somehow the world doesn't, it's not clear. Like there's this kind of, there's like a cloud between you and the world. And I think, or at least for me, the feeling was that this needs to somehow be gotten out of his head, out of his system, out of his body, and able to be able to continue life again. So his way to do that is to start to write it down, write it like a story, snippets of stories, words that come out, and that eventually pours out into this story, or kind of abstract story, if you will. And I think that's probably also why my role had a lot of different colors musically, because all of these extremes of emotions kind of come out, and they come out in bursts and in cries and in tears and in whispers, but it needs to, it's like this, I need to get it out.
Look there, it's the midwife and the cobbler. They walk behind the walking man. Yesterday she would have been 5. Hey, poisoning your soul again. What's that in your mouth? Open.
Yeah.
I think, Bobby, that as an actor yourself, you probably appreciate something that blows me away about Nora is this, like, she can 1 second sing the most beautiful or the most heart-wrenching wail, and then be completely rational and objective and speak over the. I mean, I just don't know how many dimensions she has and how quickly she can switch registers. It's. I think that's what makes her character. I mean, she is what makes her character so extraordinary. That multidimensionality and that ability to switch in an instant from inside to outside, to shift her perspectives. So dramatic.
Yes, to just allow all that to happen without censoring oneself in terms of how one is feeling at a certain moment is so very evident in your work, Nora. All of the work. The recording of Falling Out of Time is out. Debuts Friday, October 9th on Inner Circle Records. And I have a copy here. It really is gorgeous. I just think it's a very important piece right now. And speaking of, I mean, there's so much layering of artistic work. I just wanted to acknowledge the special CD package, which features the work of the American artist Mary Frank, and as well as liner notes from the novelist Leah Hager Cohen, and a note from David Grossman himself. If you look at the chat, you will see the link to pre-order either the digital or the physical copy of the album on Bandcamp. And when you order, you'll get 3 tracks to listen to immediately before the album is released tomorrow. Karen, Jeremy, Nora, thank you so very much for joining us tonight and for sharing your journey with this magnificent piece, Falling Out of Time. Thank you so very much. And take care. You take care, all of you. See you soon.
Bye.
We have one more of Kevork's vignettes to share. This one is featuring Biela da Costa. Anything you'd like to tell us before we watch this one, Osvaldo?
Yeah, this is a very among many dramatic moments, this is like, the Jewish custom of tearing your clothes.
Rending, yes.
This is
rending the garments.
Rending the garments, exactly. And this is the rending of the marriage, not for lack of love, but because, like David explained to us when we were workshopping the piece, a father and a mother are many times each is in their own island of grief. So, whereas the father takes this metaphorical endless walk, the mother climbs up to a belfry, and she sees the father, her husband, from afar. So it's that terrible feeling of seeing these two islands of grief more and more apart.
Well, let's see that video, please. Each piece of this, I'm sure when the audience experiences it, it just more and more fills them with this panoply of emotions. It certainly does for me. And with that, we're heading into the future, because your aspiration is to create a full-length animated film with Kevork Murad. Why did you want to work with Kevork on this? Aside from the fact, I know from Altogether Now, his previous appearance, that he's an amazing artist and a lovely human being.
Yeah. Well, I think perhaps the shortest answer is that I feel that there is a certain telepathy between his art and mine. I think that we understand each other without the need for words, which is something that happens a lot also with the Silk Road. So it's natural, and I think I just love his art, and I think it resonates with the density of this piece, with the density, I would say, I feel that a lot of the music has the rhythm of his brushstroke. So that's that, right? I mean, it resonates. It's just like two manifestations of the same impulse.
Yeah, and as I said before, I want to see the whole piece, but the animated vignettes that were created just add to the richness. They add to the richness of Falling Out of Time. I hope that happens soon, because I will be first in line for a ticket. And, Osvaldo, thank you for spending this time with me and giving us such a deep and rich glimpse into the past, present, and future of Falling Out of Time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, because you dug very deep. And on one hand, it's hard. On the other hand, it's what life is about. Thank you.
You take care, and I will see you very soon, I hope. What an extraordinary story. The Silk Road Ensemble, just to remind you, the recording of Falling Out of Time will be out Friday, October 9th. That's tomorrow. And if you're watching this live, you can pre-order right now. I hope you'll all check it out. And even if you listen to music via streaming service, consider buying the album digitally or physically. And that, because that's the only way to ensure that the dollars you're spending are supporting the artists whose work you're enjoying. The link to pre-order is in the chat and the comments. And this is fun. The artists are going to gather in a Zoom right now at the end of the show for a virtual release party, and we would love you to join us. We will be taking your questions as well. I'm sure you have a lot of them. The link is in the chat, so come on by and spend some time with all of us. Thanks to Emily and Deborah, to Nora and Jeremy and Karen, and especially to Osvaldo for joining me tonight. I am so moved, obviously, by this incredible work of art and by the comments from all the participants. And I want to read a quote from David Grossman, which is in the beautiful CD booklet, because it says it all for me. There is one place, or rather one dimension, where we can feel, if only for an instant, both the absolute nihility of death and the full abundance of life. And that dimension is art. It is literature and poetry, music, theater, and cinema, painting, and sculpture. When we are in that place, we can sense concurrently both the everything and the abysmal void, the negation of life and its affirmation. Until we meet again, keep a song in your heart and hold a good thought, and please vote. Good night.